In a world where technological supremacy increasingly depends on access to obscure but critical materials, a new chapter in the global rare earth saga is unfolding. While Washington has spent years attempting to loosen Beijing's grip on these essential elements, Canberra has now entered the arena with its own ambitious strategy. Recently, the Australian government unveiled its intention to create a national stockpile of critical minerals, while simultaneously exploring the possibility of implementing price floor mechanisms for crucial resources, particularly rare earth elements. But this isn't just another resource policy announcement. Behind closed doors, Australian officials are negotiating what could become a transformative partnership with the United States, one that carries a price tag of $750 million. Industry analysts and geopolitical observers see a dual motivation behind Australia's sudden assertiveness. On the surface, it's about economic security and supply chain resilience. Beneath that, however, lies a clear signal of allegiance to Washington and a calculated attempt to counterbalance China's overwhelming influence in a market it has dominated for decades. The question everyone's asking is straightforward, but profoundly complex. Can this $770 million initiative genuinely disrupt the rare earth hierarchy that China has spent generations constructing? Before we explore that answer, if you're finding value in this analysis, please consider subscribing to stay informed on the latest developments in global economics, technology, and geopolitics. Now let's examine the forces reshaping the rare earth landscape. The catalyst. How trade wars triggered China's rare earth response. To understand where we are today, we need to rewind to the escalating economic tensions between Washington and Beijing. After the United States implemented wave after wave of punitive tariffs targeting Chinese goods, Beijing eventually responded with a weapon many had long suspected existed but hoped would never be deployed: restrictions on rare earth exports. This past April marked a turning point. China announced export controls covering 7 categories of medium to heavy rare earth materials. The announcement sent shockwaves through government buildings and corporate boardrooms across the developed world, particularly in countries heavily invested in advanced technology sectors. And for good reason. These materials aren't niche products with limited applications. They're fundamental components in virtually every modern technological device we depend on. Consider your smartphone. The vibrant display, the miniaturized speakers, the camera's autofocus mechanism, all rely on rare earth elements. The laptop you're watching this on, the servers powering the internet, the precision lasers used in medical procedures, the extraordinarily powerful magnets in electric vehicles and wind turbines, the list goes on. Perhaps most concerning for Western defense establishments, these same materials are absolutely critical to advanced military systems. From guided missiles to stealth aircraft, from advanced radar systems to satellite communications, America's military technological edge depends substantially on a steady supply of Chinese rare earths. But that April announcement was merely the opening salvo in China's strategic response. Just weeks ago, Beijing issued another directive that significantly broadened the scope of its export controls. This latest regulation extends approval requirements beyond raw materials to include any overseas products containing Chinese rare earth elements, with particular attention to the semiconductor industry. The implications are staggering. Under these new rules, every single export involving rare earths of Chinese origin now requires individual government approval. This represents Beijing's first application of what legal scholars call long-arm jurisdiction in the rare earth sector. In practical terms, it means that even if a semiconductor chip is designed in California, manufactured in Taiwan, and assembled in Vietnam, if it contains rare earth materials that originated in China, it falls under Beijing's export control regime. The gray market, smuggling, and subterfuge in the rare earth trade. Where there are controls, there are inevitably attempts to circumvent them. Some nations and companies have turned to what diplomats politely call alternative procurement channels, smuggling in plain language. These operations involve elaborate networks using third-party countries as intermediaries to obscure the ultimate destination of rare earth shipments. Just months ago, Chinese authorities exposed one particularly sophisticated operation. Their investigation revealed that certain American purchasers had successfully imported approximately 3,800 tons of rare earth materials through circuitous routes involving Thailand and Mexico. These companies were essentially laundering rare earths, using friendly countries as transit points to evade Chinese regulatory oversight. Of course, not everyone is willing to operate in legal gray zones. Many Western corporations have attempted to work within the system, submitting applications through official channels to obtain the necessary export licenses from Chinese authorities. However, the approval rate tells a sobering story. Since April, among the hundreds of license applications filed by Western companies, only about 1/4 have received approval. The official explanation from Chinese authorities adds another fascinating layer to this story. According to Beijing, many applications were rejected for what seemed like a minor technical issue. Western companies submitted their paperwork in Excel format, while Chinese regulations specify the use of WPS Office, a domestic Chinese software alternative. To outside observers, this might seem like bureaucratic pettiness, but those familiar with China's strategic thinking recognize something deeper at work. This seemingly trivial requirement reflects a broader ambition. Beijing's determination to establish its own technological ecosystems and regulatory frameworks, reducing dependence on Western standards and software, even in administrative processes. It's a small detail that speaks to a much larger vision of technological sovereignty. Australia's $770 million countermove, building a Western rare earth fortress. Faced with these tightening controls and uncertain access to Chinese supplies, nations across the globe have been quietly developing contingency plans. Australia's recent move represents one of the most substantial efforts yet to create an alternative to Chinese rare earth dominance. The plan that emerged from Canberra carries a $770 million commitment and involves deep collaboration with the United States. According to sources familiar with the negotiations, Australian government officials began seriously developing this critical minerals strategic reserve initiative as early as April, coinciding with China's initial export restrictions. From the beginning, the framework was designed to incorporate American participation. At its core, the Australian proposal envisions a government-backed strategic reserve system. But it's more than just stockpiling raw materials. The ambition is to construct an entire value chain, from initial mineral extraction through processing and refining, all the way to the production of finished magnets and components. This comprehensive approach represents what many are calling a de-sinification strategy, an attempt to build Western supply chains that can function independently of Chinese processing capabilities and supply networks. The political dimensions are equally significant. By September, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was reportedly hoping to finalize key aspects of this agreement ahead of scheduled discussions with former President Donald Trump. For Australia, successfully implementing this initiative would substantially elevate its status in global critical minerals diplomacy and potentially reshape its economic relationship with both the United States and China. Yet observers note that the timing of Australia's accelerated push toward implementation likely wasn't coincidental. On October 9th, Beijing released an updated rare earth policy document that fundamentally changed the landscape. This new directive expanded export controls from the original 7 rare earth elements to 12. More significantly, it explicitly identified the defense and semiconductor industries as priority control sectors. The most consequential aspect of this October announcement was its extraterritorial reach. Any product anywhere in the world containing Chinese rare earth components or manufactured using Chinese rare earth technology would now require export approval from Beijing. For countries like the United States and Australia, which depend heavily on Chinese rare earths but lack comprehensive domestic processing infrastructure, this represented a direct challenge to their technological and military supply chains. Why Australia needs America: the economics and politics of partnership. Australia's decision to pursue this initiative jointly with the United States wasn't made in isolation. Several factors drove Canberra toward Washington's embrace. Certainly, America's economic power and technological capabilities make it an attractive partner, but the calculation goes deeper than simple economics. Building a complete rare earth processing industry from scratch presents enormous technical and financial challenges. The chemistry involved is extraordinarily complex, the environmental concerns are significant, and the capital requirements are substantial. For a country of Australia's size and economic capacity, attempting such an undertaking alone would be financially risky and potentially impossible to execute successfully. Moreover, the geopolitical context cannot be ignored. The escalating friction between Washington and Beijing over the past several years has forced countries throughout the Asia-Pacific region to make difficult choices about alignment and partnership. Australia, with its deep economic ties to China but security alliance with the United States, has found itself in a particularly delicate position. There's also a fundamental reality that Australian policymakers had to confront. Challenging an industrial system that China has spent decades perfecting would be unrealistic for any single nation, even one with Australia's resources. By bringing the United States into the framework, Canberra gains not just financial resources and technical expertise, but also political cover and strategic credibility for pushing forward with the $770 million mineral reserve project. Interestingly, the Rare Earth Initiative may be connected to entirely separate trade tensions. In September, China announced it would suspend iron ore purchases from BHP, one of Australia's mining giants. The official reason centered on disputes over pricing negotiations and, crucially, the currency to be used for settlement. This iron ore dispute reveals another dimension of the economic competition between China and the West. Historically, China's iron ore imports from Australia were handled through individual company contracts, leading to fragmented pricing and, many Chinese analysts argued, giving Australian suppliers excessive pricing power. In the recent negotiations, Beijing insisted that future transactions be settled in renminbi rather than US dollars. This demand serves two strategic purposes for China. First, it advances the internationalization of the yuan, contributing to what many call de-dollarization, reducing global dependence on the US dollar as the universal medium for commodity trading. Second, it shifts negotiating leverage in resource markets by controlling the currency of settlement. Some analysts speculate that Australia's sudden urgency in advancing the Rare Earth Reserve Plan may be partially motivated by a desire to regain bargaining leverage with China. If Beijing can restrict Australian iron ore purchases, perhaps Canberra can reduce dependence on Chinese rare earth processing. It's a high-stakes game of economic chess being played with resources that power the modern world. The track record. Why previous decoupling attempts have failed. The question remains, does Australia's current initiative actually pose a credible threat to China's rare earth dominance? To answer that, we need to examine previous attempts to build alternative supply chains. Australia is hardly the first to try this. Earlier this year, former President Trump proposed constructing metal refining facilities directly within U.S. Department of Defense installations. The logic was straightforward. If rare earth processing happened on military bases, it would enhance security and reduce reliance on foreign suppliers, particularly China. By October, the United States had announced an even more ambitious plan, committing up to $1 billion for the procurement of critical mineral resources. This initiative targeted specific materials including cobalt, antimony, tantalum, and scandium. Simultaneously, the U.S. government planned to expand geological surveys for rare metals, rare earths, tungsten, bismuth, indium, and others, with the goal of increasing strategic stockpiles and ensuring uninterrupted supply for weapons systems and advanced technology platforms. The objective was clear: offset China's resource dominance through domestic production and strategic reserves. But the reality has proven far more challenging than the ambition. America's domestic rare earth deposits are geographically dispersed, relatively low in concentration, and often located in areas where extraction is difficult and environmentally problematic. Even if these resources could be economically extracted and processed, the resulting materials would struggle to meet the purity and consistency standards required for advanced applications, let alone compete with China's established, high-quality production. There have been multilateral efforts as well. On July 1st of this year, foreign ministers from the United States, India, Japan, and Australia convened to announce a joint initiative promoting diversified cooperation on critical minerals and rare earth supply chains. This Quad framework represented yet another attempt to counterbalance Chinese dominance. While this alliance includes both the US and Australia, it differs fundamentally from the bilateral reserve plan we've been discussing. Australia's $770 million project functions primarily as a physical resource stockpiling mechanism. The broader Indo-Pacific Alliance, by contrast, focuses more on policy coordination and diplomatic alignment. Its stated goal is constructing a critical mineral supply system independent of China, thereby supporting high-value industries including semiconductors, electric vehicles, defense systems, and artificial intelligence computing infrastructure. Despite all these initiatives, declarations, and investments, the fundamental reality remains unchanged. None of these measures have yet produced any substantial impact on China's market position. Not long ago, Trump took to social media to describe China's rare earth policies as representing a terrible moment for American industry. Various U.S. officials have publicly characterized Beijing's export controls as economic coercion and strategic manipulation. The irony, of course, is difficult to miss. These same officials seem to have developed selective amnesia about which country initiated the tariff escalation that triggered this entire sequence of events. When you start a trade war, you shouldn't be surprised when your opponent uses the weapons at their disposal. So, what about Australia specifically? Can this new initiative succeed where others have struggled? The challenges are substantial and honestly worth examining in detail. Australia does possess significant rare earth reserves, about 6% of known global deposits, placing it fourth worldwide in terms of resource endowment. That's the good news. The complications begin when you look more closely at where these resources are located and what it would actually take to extract them. Most of Australia's economically viable rare earth deposits are concentrated in Western Australia. Resources in other regions tend to suffer from either poor quality, meaning lower concentrations of valuable elements, or insufficient quantity to justify the massive infrastructure investments required for extraction and processing. Even in Western Australia, where the most promising deposits exist, the economics are challenging. Extraction costs are estimated to be at least double those in China, and that's before accounting for processing costs. But the real challenge isn't just getting rare earths out of the ground. In their raw form, these materials are essentially useless for high-tech applications. Rare earth processing is one of the most technically demanding and environmentally sensitive operations in modern industry. It involves multiple complex stages: separation of individual elements from mixed ores, purification to extremely high standards, and the removal of radioactive byproducts that naturally occur alongside rare earths. Each stage requires specialized expertise, expensive equipment, and careful environmental management. From an industrial value chain perspective, the picture becomes even more challenging. Most advanced applications of rare earths, the high-margin products that really justify the investment in processing infrastructure, are dominated by manufacturers in East Asian countries. These companies have decades of experience, established relationships, and optimized processes. Breaking into these markets as a new supplier would require not just competitive pricing, but also demonstrated reliability and consistent quality over many years. The financial equation is equally daunting. Rare earth projects typically require enormous upfront capital investment, face long development timelines before generating revenue, and carry substantial uncertainty about long-term returns. The market for specific rare earth elements can be volatile, with prices subject to both technological change and geopolitical interference. Even with government subsidies and loan guarantees, attracting sufficient private capital into the Australian rare earth sector would be extremely difficult. To truly understand why challenging China is so difficult, we need to appreciate the scope of its dominance. China currently accounts for about 69% of global rare earth mineral production. That's already a commanding position, but in the processing stages, where raw ores are transformed into the purified elements that industry actually needs, China's control exceeds 90% of global capacity. This isn't the result of recent policy decisions or temporary market conditions. China's position in rare earths represents the culmination of decades of deliberate industrial strategy, massive infrastructure investment, accumulated technical knowledge, and systematic development of expertise across the entire value chain. From mining operations to processing facilities, from refining technology to manufacturing of end products, China has built an integrated system that is both highly efficient and remarkably cost-effective. These advantages cannot be replicated quickly, regardless of how much money governments are willing to spend or how urgently they want alternatives. This is the result of generational development, environmental trade-offs that Western countries might not be willing to make, and economies of scale that only emerge after years of continuous operation. Even under the most optimistic scenarios, if Australia, the United States, and their allies were to immediately begin constructing alternative rare earth supply chains with unlimited budgets and complete political support, industry experts estimate it would require a minimum of 10 years to achieve anything approaching China's current capabilities. And that's assuming no technical setbacks, no political disruptions, and no countermeasures from China. Given these formidable challenges, what's really driving Australia's $770 million rare earth initiative? In my assessment, this is fundamentally a geopolitical maneuver dressed in the language of industrial policy and economic security. On one level, it serves as a tangible demonstration of goodwill toward the United States, a signal that Australia stands firmly within the Western alliance structure as competition with China intensifies. In the complex chess game of great power politics, such gestures matter. They build trust, strengthen partnerships, and create reciprocal obligations. On another level, Australia is attempting to position itself advantageously within the ongoing restructuring of global rare earth supply chains. Even if the project doesn't actually break Chinese dominance, the process of building it could enhance Australia's diplomatic leverage, attract related investments, and secure its position as a critical player in Western resource security planning. But we should be realistic about what this initiative can and cannot achieve. The notion that a single country, or even a small coalition of countries, could challenge China's entrenched position in the rare earth sector within just a few years is, frankly, implausible. The barriers, technical, financial, environmental, and strategic, are simply too substantial. What we're witnessing is not the beginning of the end of Chinese rare earth dominance, but rather the opening phase of what will likely be a decades-long competition. As technologies continue advancing, as electric vehicles become ubiquitous, as renewable energy systems scale globally, as military capabilities become ever more dependent on advanced materials, the strategic importance of rare earths and other critical minerals will only intensify. This competition is far from reaching any kind of resolution. We're likely to see continued investment in alternative supply chains, ongoing efforts to develop substitutes and recycling technologies, periodic trade restrictions and counter-restrictions, and persistent geopolitical maneuvering around these essential resources. Australia's $770 million plan is one move in this larger game. It may not succeed in its stated objective of breaking Chinese dominance, but it will shape relationships, influence future policy directions, and potentially create new economic and diplomatic possibilities for Canberra. The rare earth story is ultimately about much more than obscure elements with difficult-to-pronounce names. It's about technological sovereignty, economic security, and geopolitical power in an era where advanced materials are as strategically important as oil was in the 20th century. As this competition unfolds, the decisions being made today in capitals from Canberra to Washington to Beijing will reverberate for generations. So, what's your assessment of Australia's rare earth strategy? Is it a genuine attempt to reshape global supply chains, or primarily a political gesture toward Washington? Share your perspective in the comments below. And to stay informed as this story continues developing, make sure you subscribe and enable notifications. We'll continue tracking the forces reshaping the global economy and the competition for the resources that power our technological future.